Truth without grace is just condemnation.
Grace without truth is just permission.
We need both truth and grace.
It's how we should view all the things that happen in the world through those lenses.
Welcome back to the TAGcast. I'm your host, Jonathan, and
Janae.
And we are going to be diving into the diversity of religions. We got a lot of different religions in our world today, and yet who knows which one's the right one? Are they all the same? Are they all worshiping the same God? We want to try and explore this through the lens of truth and grace. Is there truth? Is there grace as we look at this, and what does the Bible have to say about this?
Some of you may have heard there's an Eastern story that talks about these 6 blind men who encounter an elephant, and each of them attempts to explain what an elephant is based on their experience with it. And so you have one blind man who walks up and feels the side of the elephant and says, "The elephant must be like a wall." Another one grabs the trunk and says, "An elephant is like a snake." Another one grabs the tusk and says, "It must be like a spear." Another one grabs onto its leg and says, "No, an elephant is like a tree." And the last one says, "All of you are wrong." He's holding on to the tail and he said, "An elephant is like a rope." And so most of the time, religion, the diversity of religions, is an attempt by people to explain the world around them. And if we're not seeing the whole elephant, we're not seeing the whole truth, then we can get focused on that one piece and we can develop this idea or this religion about what truth is like based on our limited experience with it.
And the parable is intended to suggest, like, oh, we're building our worldview or our religions or whatever based off of our limited ability to see the whole picture. But ultimately, an elephant is an elephant, right? And if he's there, we got to try and figure out, okay, how do we understand what's there, even if we can't see the whole picture? And how do we make grace for those who are trying to see the whole elephant, but just can't see everything all at once? My brother actually says it's hubris to think that you can know what objective truth is. I had to look this word up because my brother's very smart and I'm not. It's like dangerous pride, right? Like it's arrogant to think that we could know which religion is really true, and not just arrogant, but there's danger in it because we can cause harm to other people because there's diversity in worldviews and things like that. But ultimately the argument is we can't figure it out, so don't bother. And yet on the other hand, there's this whole collection of people who are like, aren't all religions basically the same? Don't they all worship the same God, the idea of a God? So we're all basically kind of on the same page.
And a lot of people, when you're on the outside looking in, obviously we are practicing Christians and we are not practicing Buddhists and we're not practicing Islam. And so we have studied them because I think as a Christian, I think God desires us to understand the world around us, understand what other people are viewing as truth so that we can, in theory, teach them, reach them in a different way. But ultimately, we know the things that we have read, not personal experiences in those. And so you kind of try to boil down some of these larger religions that people know about into maybe a little soundbite or a little snapshot. And so you look at like Buddhists are always about learning something. They just need to learn something more. With Islam, it's I need to do something. I need to do something more and then I'll be worthy. And a lot of the New Age religions, a lot of the spiritualism things are, I just need to experience it. And then I will be closer to understanding what truth is and how do I practice this better. But with Christianity, the difference is it's all about a person. It's all about knowing Jesus. It's not about experiencing or learning or doing something. It's about knowing Jesus and understanding who he was, which is what makes it different than all of those other religions that are being practiced around the world.
Yeah. And I guess to try and fit within the parable that we started with, Jesus is the whole elephant, right? Like, yeah. And so the difference here is in the parable, these people are trying to come to the elephant, trying to figure out on their own. what can I glean from this? What can I experience? What can I do? What can I know about this? But ultimately, the revelation is that Jesus came to us, and that's the big difference. And I think that's going to be kind of the angle we try and look at, how Christianity is so different to every other religion.
And the thing that we look at is that if you look at the Bible as a whole, we talked about last episode about looking at God as a whole picture throughout the whole Bible. And if you look at the Bible as a whole, God allows for and acknowledges that there are other religions out there. There are numerous examples of him reminding his people of, you will have no other gods before me. He's acknowledging those cultures that they were coming into contact with, those people that they were encountering that were not worshiping Yahweh God.
Right. So he does make a clear distinction. Yeah, there is a very significant difference between all the religions. So right off the bat, it's a little bit difficult for us to stand on this platform or this idea that all the religions are basically the same at their core, worshiping the same God. No. Yahweh God says that's not the case. It is very different to worship him versus worshiping other gods. And part of this, I would say the development, chime in and rebuke me, but I think the development of this diversity of religions, we can go to Romans 1:19, where he says, the invisible, what does it say? The invisible attributes of God have been known, deep down in our core, maybe our soul, if you will. We know, human beings know there's a divine being. And so being aware of that fact, either we rush into perceiving that he's the tail of the elephant or the leg, and we build this religion based off of our desire to know what's right and true, or we also can just build it based off of the things that I want God to look like this. And so there is God, we're aware of a divine being, but we also can get carried away with our own ideas and perspectives of what he's like and who he is.
Because oftentimes we feel an immediate need for what a God should do for us or should be in our life. And we rush in to fill a void of something we can't understand by creating something that fills this spot in us.
Right, using what we do understand. Okay.
And so, there's so many fun examples in the Bible of where God kind of confronts one of these pagan ideas of who God is.
Okay.
And one of my favorites is with Elijah in the Old Testament. And there's a large number, and Baal is one of the gods that the Assyrian nation worships, and a lot of the other cultures that they are encountering in what was Old Testament Israel at the time worship. And so he has prophets that speak supposedly words from Baal. And so Elijah confronts them and says, okay, let's have a contest. Let's see what our God can do. And they build altars, and Elijah says, okay, call down, have your God light this altar on fire. And they literally go all day. They pray, they chant, they do all this thing, and nothing happens.
Right.
And then Elijah says, okay, it's my turn. He kind of even mocks them a little bit,
right.
Is your God asleep? Are you sure? Where is he at?
Is he on the John?
And so then it's Elijah's turn to call on Yahweh God, and he even douses his altar in water just to make it all the more significant. And he calls out to God, and God immediately, it's lit on fire. Everything is consumed, and it's the power of Yahweh God, the true God, is seen by all of those people. God doesn't immediately dismiss, he doesn't wipe off all pagan religion. There's still pagan religion going on even after this display of power.
Yeah.
but he shows himself. He shows up.
Wow. Okay, yeah. So God makes room for, okay, if that's where you want to go, if that's how you want to perceive the world, if that's how you want to live in the world, that's you're right. I've given you that freedom and that liberty, but here's an expression of who I am. Here's a piece of who I am, and you can believe in me or not. Wow, that's a really interesting. He still allows it to
because
wow.
God has given human beings free will. God has given us the opportunity to choose him. And so if you look at some of the other religions, their focus is eliminating all of their enemies. Where God is, we talked about in the last podcast about how God is slow in coming back because he wants all men to come to repentance. And so oftentimes other religions are just about eliminating all their enemies, where God is like, I love my enemies. I want to give them time to see and understand who I am in a way that they aren't right now. And so it's very different. And so he's not forcing us. He's not leveling the playing field, by getting rid of all the enemies or all the strong teams. He's like, look at me. This is different.
Yeah. And I know it probably feels a little convenient that we're using the Bible to explain why we believe in the Bible. But what's so great about the Bible is that it includes the fact that there is that liberty. There are those other religions and those other gods. And not that the Bible doesn't acknowledge gods in the sense like God is competing with these other gods, right? It's the idea that people have created gods to worship, despite the fact that they're not actually divine beings, right? They're just wood and clay and stone and whatever. But there are also some other examples of people who have left their culture and the religions that they were raised in, like Ruth. Is that who Ruth.
Who actually is in the lineage of Christ. God chose to bring her. She was a Moabite princess, and she was from what would have been considered a pagan culture.
Yep.
And she married a Jewish man, and God allowed her to have a point in time where she had to stand and say, am I going to be like my people, my culture, or am I going to follow after Yahweh God? She had experienced God. She had seen who he was. And she says that, where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. And eventually God allows that Moabite princess to be in the lineage of his son, which is just amazing, where God is reaching out to those people that are not originally following after him.
Right. And
he's giving grace.
Even in like the beginning, right? And how he still is calling all sorts of diversity of people to be a part of what he's doing.
Sometimes it feels like we wrestle, and I think the problem we get to right now in society is we have a big push to why can't everybody just get along? And why do we need to focus on the differences? Let's focus on why we're the same.
Yeah.
And so what does that look like? And is that even possible?
Well, I mean, we definitely see kind of like a push in that direction, even in the Christian church. We see the Universalist church, which is definitely the, hey, we can all get along and let's all just worship our own gods together in familiarity. But even in the Christian church, we have like progressive Christianity. We have humanism seeping into, like we are our own gods. But ultimately what that's doing is it's undermining this, and so it's not actually Christianity anymore. And we see an effort, even with the Pope we had talked about.
One of the things that Pope Francis has kind of tried to be a champion of is everybody just getting along. Yeah. And he held this year in what is known as the kind of the birthplace of all the major religions is the ancient city of which is in modern day Iraq, if you want to look for it. But he held basically a prayer meeting. He was trying to bring together Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Yeah. And this multi-faith service, and basically saying, but we're all children of Abraham. Why can't we all just get along? But the problem comes in the fact of the Jewish religion and Islam do not acknowledge that Jesus is God's son. They acknowledge him as a teacher. They acknowledge there's value in his work when he was on earth, but they don't acknowledge that he is the son of God. So we're not starting at the same place. And so this idea of kind of that kumbaya, can't we all just get along and sit around the campfire, really starts to fall apart when you dig into the basics for those religions are not the same.
The foundation. The idea is trying to find that common ground to tie us together, but it's not enough to say the elephant is a rope, right? No, there's more.
Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life.
Right. So you can't really make a claim like that and be inclusive to all ways and all, yeah.
And for a lot of people, that seems very harsh. It seems very, has a lot of hubris.
Right.
I mean, that is a word that kind of encompasses Jesus was kind of drawing that line in the sand.
I don't remember. Maybe we talked about it. But when I hear Jesus say things like that, and I try to take a step back and say, okay, is there another way Jesus could have said it that wasn't so abrasive, that wasn't so, confrontational? If he really is the only way to the Father, if he is the source of life and salvation, is there any other way that he could possibly say this that wouldn't be offensive?
I don't think so.
And I don't think so.
Because I think if he doesn't draw that line, if he doesn't claim it all,
right,
then you allow for things to be a little, let's just tweak this a little bit, or that isn't what he really said. And suddenly truth is truth because there's nothing else that stands against. I don't know if that's the right way to, but if you water down truth enough, it means nothing. So if you're making a truth claim, it has to be strong enough to stand up on its own, that it can't be somehow pulled apart or argued against or whatever. And it's he draws that line. He's like, no, I'm not saying I am one of the ways. It's I am.
Right. And sorry, go ahead.
Well, and that goes back to in the Old Testament when God is interacting with Moses and he's going to send him back to Pharaoh. And he's like, but who do I tell them you are? Yeah. And God says, tell them I am. There's no other explanation needed. That encompasses everything. I am. And Jesus used that same phrasing of oftentimes in the New Testament to explain to people who he was. He uses that I am statement.
Yeah. Truth is singular. There's no variations. There's no versions of truth. There's no a series of truths. Truth is one thing. Jesus says, I am the truth. 1 Timothy 4:16 says that we need to guard our doctrine carefully. Be careful with what you get carried away with in believing, because there is only one truth to believe in. Jesus is that truth. There's no versions. There's no variations of what is true or truth. Jesus says there's no other shepherds in John chapter 10. Matthew 7 says there's a narrow gate for you to walk through. There's a broad road that leads to destruction, but the narrow path leads to eternal life. There is one objective truth, and it is revealed in the person of Jesus. Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one. There's no one else. And either Jesus is right,
or none of it is true. And C.S. Lewis, who is an author and a theologian, who was an atheist, who became a Christian, one of his famous quotes in his book, Mere Christianity, talks about the idea that either Jesus is the Son of God or he's a madman. There's nowhere in between that you can go with Jesus and his claims. There's no version of he's just a nice man who did some nice things for people. Like, no, either he is the Son of God or he's all of this is nothing.
And it goes back to what you were saying, that Jesus made these bold claims because there's no wiggle room. So either what he said is true and we have to take it seriously, or we have to throw him out completely.
And I mean, even he himself warned right after in Matthew, where he says about the narrow gate, and it's a hard road. He acknowledged that. And right after that, he says, watch out for false teachers. There's going to be people who claim that they know the way, that they can get you to the Father, that they can somehow give you that peace that you're looking for in life.
Hope,
because hope, ultimately, all religion is trying to get you to a better place than what you currently are in the world. I mean, they may claim it different, they may frame it different, but ultimately they're trying to give you something that you don't have right now. And so Jesus knew that. Yeah. Jesus knew people were going to rebel against this idea. I mean, we as humans don't like someone to draw the line in the sand. I mean, how many times when you were growing up and your parents made a rule and they're like, okay, this is, and you're just like, how close can I tiptoe to that line?
Right. Yeah, I am the way to the Father. This is the line, hard and fast. And what's so great is that Jesus even encounters the difficulty of that thought process. Because in John chapter 6, he says some really crazy stuff that we're not going to get into. But like thousands of people leave because they say, this guy is crazy. This is hard. Who could possibly adhere? Who could follow what Jesus is saying? Because that's too difficult. Everyone leaves, and then Jesus looks at his disciples.
His 12, his inner circle.
Yeah.
And he says to them, like, are you going to leave too? And he gives them that room to wrestle with it. He gives them the grace to know that this is hard, that this is difficult, that they might need to wrestle with it too. Just like those people that walked away. And what we don't know is, of those people that walked away, did they come back after they had wrestled? Because God allows for that. He knows we're going to need to wrestle this. I mean, he created us as humans. He knows that those I am statements of this is the way, this is the line are hard for us.
Yeah.
They're hard to get past our humanness. And so he allows for that with his disciples. Like, do you want to walk away too? And there's a quote, G.K. Chesterton was an author who wrote at the beginning of the 1900s. He was an English author. And one of his quotes that I love is that it says that, Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found hard and not tried.
What does that mean? Because that's fancy word sounds.
It's fancy word sounds, but it's the idea that when you really dive into Christianity, people don't find it lacking in what they need. They don't find it lacking in meaning. They can acknowledge who God is and who Jesus is, but it's hard. And so a lot of people look at it and don't go any further because they're like, this is too hard.
Yeah, it's not that believing in Jesus leaves me unsatisfied. I'm still wishing I knew more about God. You will find everything you need to know about in a God in Jesus, but it is this really hard wrestling match. And that's such a perfect point, I think, to land on as we look at Scripture, is the Jewish faith, which, if you're really unfamiliar with how Judaism and Christianity fit together, it started in Judaism, right? It started with the Israelite faith. Jesus came out of the Israelite faith as an Israelite and taught us but he taught us the correct view of God. And so then we follow Jesus now instead of Israel, who was a man, originally his name was Jacob, which means cheater. That's what I go with. And so it's this guy who's a cheater, and he's a shyster, and he has this encounter with Yahweh God where he wrestles with God like all night long. He wasn't really sure. You explained it better this earlier.
Well, when you look in Genesis, the story of Jacob and who he is, prior to this encounter that he has with God, where he wrestles with God all night long, prior to that, he always refers to God as the God of his fathers, the God of his ancestors, not his God. Mm-hmm. And then after this encounter, this wrestling match with God, where God allows him, like, bring your doubts, bring the things that you don't understand, wrestle with me through this. He then comes out of that with the idea that this is my God. It's no longer just the God of his fathers.
You know what's just now kind of like hitting me? When Jacob first goes to Haran, he has a dream of God, Jacob's ladder. And at the end of the dream, he says, God, if you will provide for me, protect me, and get me back to my father's land, I'll worship you. But then if you follow the story and you see the way Jacob does get very wealthy, he does go back to his father's land. He has been protected and provided all the way. But the way that it happens doesn't look like the way that Jacob would have found for himself. I certainly wouldn't have chosen to have gotten wealthy off of my, deceptive, horrible of an uncle and all these things. But God did do these things not the way that Jacob thought they ought to be done. But despite that fact, he still acknowledged, God, you are God. Wow.
Well, and that's often why people find Christianity hard. Because God doesn't always show up like we as humans want him to. He doesn't always answer our question the way we want it to be answered. And so that's hard. Doesn't change who God is, just like we talked about in the last one. God is God. God is always the same.
Yeah.
But it's hard when it doesn't go the way we wanted, when something happens. And so that's where God is like, wrestle with me. Yeah. I'm okay with that. I leave room in my love for you to know that you're going to need to wrestle with some of this, that you're going to need to continue to learn about my truth, to learn about how I express grace.
I love that so much about God. He's so good. And what he does is he ends up changing Jacob's name from Jacob to Israel, which literally means wrestles with God. Like, that's a blessing. God blesses him with a name change and this identity that says, yeah, that's my type of people, the type of people that wrestle with me. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's why he allows for a variety of religions, because he wants people to come to him because they've wrestled through the truth and they're coming to him with this understanding of who he is, not just because they have to, but because they desire to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe you're in a wrestling match right now and you're like, man, I don't really know which way's the right way. I don't know how to process. There are a couple of books.
So there's some really good resources. Lee Strobel is an investigative journalist and a lawyer who was an atheist, and he set out to disprove Christianity.
Yeah.
And he ended up becoming a Christian, and he has written a series of books called The Case For, and there's the case for faith, there's the case for Christ, there's a case for the Creator. They are amazing resources to sort through these things that we wrestle with. Why should we believe there is only one way? Why should we believe that there is a creator, that there is a reason that Jesus was the Son of God? They're all great resources laid out. I mean, he was an award-winning journalist who then uses that talent that God gave him as a way to proclaim who God was. And I mean, he set out to disprove it.
And in essence, I think basically he's documenting for us his own wrestling match.
Yep.
And someone who can put that into words, I think that's so helpful, because sometimes we wrestle and we don't know how to process our thoughts and what we're thinking and why we feel the way that we do. But here's an award-winning person who can use their words magically to narrate and express his own wrestling match. So we encourage you guys, if you're looking for something to wrestle with, obviously we would encourage you to read the Bible, but The Case for books are also a good option.
Yep.
What are books that you guys have found that have helped you in your wrestling matches? Leave us a comment, send us a message. You can email us at tagcastofficial@gmail.com. Send us your thoughts. What would you like us to talk about, press into, as we continue to go through these items of these issues through the lens of truth and grace? So yeah, Tag, you're it. Head on out there, wrestle with what is the way? Is there only one way? Who is this Jesus guy? Is he crazy or is he really
the Son of God?
The Son of God, yeah. We love you guys. We'll catch you later.
See ya.